Guess who drew the short straw? Thank you for coming out, and it's a pleasure to be here. I was actually born in a small outport not too far from here, on a strip of beach actually with 12 houses, and we weren't allowed to talk to 6 of those. They were the wrong religion. Still are. One of my earliest sounds was waking up to the ocean rattling on shore, and to that of my uncles and my grandfather's voices in the morning. They'd be all hovering around their boats, preparing to shove off for the morning's fishing. Just offshore, they'd haul their nets. Sometimes if we were lucky and the wind and the seas were calm, well, perhaps an uncle or grandfather would throw us in the boat with them and take us out with them. And that would be a real treat, and one of my strongest memories. And I can see them now just standing up. They would stand up in the boats and row with their paddles, you know. And to just the sight of them, just their black sou'westers and their black oilskins and just this black silhouette against the sky, just standing there rowing that boat, and the ocean would be rocking and the boat would be rocking and they'd be rocking with it and just rowing, and I'd be there white-knuckled to the gunnels, you know. And but I love those memories. It's such a fierce memory, and that's all that's left of those days now, memories. For life is never constant. It's always in a state of change. And even there, in that isolated outport, changes were happening. Around 1950s, the seeds for the destruction of the largest fishing grounds in the world, the Grand Banks of Newfoundland, were being set. And this, of course, altered irreversibly the lives of my uncles and my grandfathers. Their lone, independent fishing methods were all overthrown, by the more modern means of production. Modernize, we were all told back then. That was the theme song sang in the 1960s in rural outport Newfoundland. Modernize. And my uncles to give up their smaller boats for the larger skiffs, and then the longliners, and then the trawlers, and then that ultimate leviathan of the sea, the factory freezers. And their capacity to fillet and freeze 30 tons of fish a day. Wow. You might say my uncles were forced out of those little boats and into the fish plants, most of them. Their oilskins and their sou'westers all traded in for hairnets and rubber aprons. But of course, that all changed too. What with the hundreds and hundreds of trawlers and factory freezers parking themselves on the spawning grounds. The ocean was lit up like a starry sky at night, is what they said. Up to 800,000 tons of year sucked into the spawning grounds till they were gone. The spawning grounds emptied. And then that horrible day on July 2nd, 1992, when the fishery was shut down indefinitely. 20,000 fishermen vanished from the sea that had helped feed and create them. And I had gone home during that year just for a visit, and I was on the beach kicking around, and I remember my uncle, my favorite one, the one who took me fishing the most. He was coming up the shore, and I remember now how he looked, his shoulders all bent, his legs all banded at the knees from fighting for balance in a rocky boat all of his life, and his face all etched by wind, his hands gnarled from plying those paddles. He truly was a creature honed by the wind and the sea. They all were, all those old uncles of mine. And I remember this uncle, he passed by an old boat that was rotting alongside. And I remember his step faltering as he looked at it, because it was all gone now. Fishing was illegal, just a concept of that for him. And my uncles, of course, all told to go and remake themselves. Change. They hadn't balked at that. Change. Their fishing lives had been full of changes, from jiggers to gill nets to trap fishing to longlining, the trawlers, the factory freezers, the fish plants. They were all about change. But this time, with the emptying of the fishing grounds, it was about more than change. It was now about having to leave land and home. It was a complete shutdown of everything that he had ever been, and his father before him, and his grandfather, and his great-grandfather. This was about shedding his DNA for a different self. Now you think about that. You live by the ocean, fishing for 40 years on an open boat, and now you gotta remake yourself. And me and my uncle, we both knew what that meant that day, sitting there on the beach. He was aging, they all were in their 50s. Remaking himself meant moving to Toronto, somewhere. Finding work in some assembly line in some factory, somewhere. And that was the day that I saw fear in my uncle's eyes. And we talked about this changed business that day. And we said, no doubt change is a good thing. But for some, as with my uncle and those others, there comes a limit to how much change one is able to make. In my uncle's days, the hills had no names. It was towards the ocean that they all looked, and our ridges, and our shells, and the plates that they named. And my uncles, they had built themselves around those ridges and shells and plates, and their boats and their stages and their codjiggers. And they loved who they were. They loved that wide open sky and the ocean's murmurings as she lapped around their boats like a coddling old mother. And now he was being asked to walk away. But more than that, he was forced into questioning who he was. If there was something wrong with him because he couldn't change, if he was too embedded in the old ways, if he was no more than the mute beast in the field, chomping back feed all day long while the rest of the world went modern around him. That's the question my uncle was struggling with that day on that beach. And now the codfish are coming back. A marine biologist friend of mine just said, you know, the lesson we have learned about the codfish was so important, I never thought we'd ever forget it. But incredulous to say, after the codfish devastation, we found ourselves making the same irrevocable decisions with the shellfish industry. Too many licenses, too big quotas, crab plants being shut down everywhere. And now we're reopening the trawl fisheries in winter when the fish are skinny and mixed in with other stocks and their abundance uncertain. What does it take? That too is the question that my uncle is asking today. What does it take for us to learn that the ocean is a living thing? And in being so, it needs to be nurtured as she nurtures us. What does it take? Thank you.